Well, listen, I hope everything's well with you, and it's good to see you again. We were going to talk a little bit, and I wanted to zero in on how you're viewing the South Side in your role as a real estate professional, and in particular, I know we talked a little bit about the possibilities of the Obama Center and what that might entail and what that might hold the potential to spur and stir down in that area of the city. So, you want to just give us an overview of how you see things, and where you see the the potential of the South Side right now.
I think you cannot acknowledge the South Side of Chicago or mention the South Side of Chicago without bringing up the World's Fair. 1893, when you look at the historical significance of what the World's Fair was, it was a time when everyone was congregating around what we now know as Washington Park and what we know as Jackson Park. But these particular landmarks that we now casually drive through were the grounds of this exposition.
Just to help out our listeners, our viewers here. So we're talking about 70 or 80 blocks south of downtown, and then over to the east, getting toward the lakefront.
Yeah, we're talking about 70. Yeah, roughly 70 at the furthest. Okay. Because once you get past 75th, so I like to say 67th Street, right? So let's say 67th Street to the south, and then the near south side starts at Roosevelt to the north.
Okay.
And so from Roosevelt all the way to 67th Street, we're talking about near south side, South Loop, Bronzeville, Woodlawn, Hyde Park, Jackson Park and Grant Park. I'm sorry, Washington Park. So if we're looking at that and we're saying, we've already said 1890s. I like to paint this because when you talk about Chicago, people want to say, oh, well, Lincoln Park is just this great place. And, they've just done such a great job. But
that's north of downtown, near North Side. So kind of the commensurate northern bookend to what you're talking about on the South Side.
Exactly. The contrast to this is saying, if I like to begin the discussion around the factors that real estate practitioners use to gauge value, and you learn this in the early years of your business, is obviously location, but it's the amenities and the characteristics that make a community, and then you start adding certain things on, and this increases value. So if I ask somebody, what is the value of Lincoln Park to the north, they will say proximity to the lakefront. They would say proximity to downtown Chicago. They would say it's a proximity to Lakeshore Drive. But after that, it's just a huge piece of land and grass and trees, right? So when we go to the south side and we say, okay, let's take those things that you just mentioned to be attributes of Lincoln Park. What is Jackson Park? Jackson Park is close to Lakeshore Drive. Jackson Park is close to the lakefront. Jackson Park is close proximity to getting downtown Chicago. You can get there, no traffic, easily, under 20 minutes, easily. And most importantly, it's large. It can host a congregation of people. It's not a small park with a little children's playground. And this was created to host the World's Fair. Or it did host the World's Fair. So it even has a larger historical significance because of this fact. So now that we've leveled it and we said, okay, the attributes of Lincoln Park and Jackson Park are pretty much the same, now you have to start examining some of the societal and socioeconomics that unfortunately are different. And you then, that begs the question of why. So this was obviously an initiative that was being supported by the commercial banking industry because a new product had been delivered to the American people, and it was called the Suburban Home. This was packaged up. And so part of the white flight that we saw during this time was we saw that the individuals that could pursue this, more importantly, afford that part of the American dream, did so. And it wasn't the people that had migrated from Mississippi or Georgia for that matter. During this 20-year period, roughly 10 to 15 to 20-year period, we're seeing urban renewal. We're seeing the white flight. We're seeing suburbanization, if you will. We're seeing individuals flock that had the means for that piece of the American dream. And the south side of Chicago now became a place where you had individuals that lacked those resources. The 1950s going up into the 1970s is when we start to see the landslide of legislative acts coming from the federal government, giving individuals an identity to live a prosperous life, and making sure via the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 60, I believe 65 or 68, they allowed people to participate in democracy, allowed people to be able to purchase homes, allowed people not to be racially obscured and racially denied, to be a part of the American dream. And so now we find ourselves, 19 in the 80s, and we find ourselves, let's talk about this period of time between the 80s and the 2000s. And at the time, we've already seen a lot of what we're seeing currently is individuals or companies looking to create more profit margin. So we see the industrial complex start to do its thing. We start to see companies reshaping their footprint. Globalization becomes a thing. We see offshoring. We see manufacturing being taken place in other countries. And so this creates even a further disinvestment or disenfranchisement for individuals that don't have the education, don't have the resources, don't have the pedigree. And this is now a concentrated area for, this is a concentrated issue for minorities. And so, we find ourselves trying to figure out, even though we've got the University of Chicago on the south side, even though we've got Washington Park on the south side, even though we've got Jackson Park on the south side, even though we have a harbor on the south side, a golf course on the south side, the Museum of Science and Industry on the south side, the DuSable Museum on the south side. And we're talking, all of that is between 15 to 20 blocks.
There's a lot of assets, a lot of cultural assets and socioeconomic assets in a pretty concentrated area.
And if you go a little further north, just a little further, you've got the Illinois Institute of Technology. You've got White Sox Stadium, which changes names on whoever wants to pay for the banner. And so, and just recently we just got notified that we'll be welcoming the Chicago Fire Football Club to Ashland and Roosevelt.
So, what is the potential? And does the Obama Center represent a chance to really kickstart it?
The Obama Center is definitely a spark.
Mm-hmm.
And Rahm Emanuel at the time, I think, said it best, that the effort of trying to put a presidential center, at the time it was contemplated to be a library, on the south side of Chicago means way more than memorializing the first African-American president. It means, to your point, Jerry, $500 million is going to get invested in Jackson Park to build this. And no one puts $500 million into anything not trying to see that promote further investment. And so what the Obama Presidential Center, I believe, is doing outside of its political initiatives is it's trying to be a catalytic uh, momentum booster for everyone that looks at the South Side of Chicago and questions whether or not it's right for investment.
And when we were talking over dinner in Chicago, you had mentioned, we were talking about what sort of hotel, for instance, might, decide to plant a flag there to serve what will obviously be a lot of visitor traffic and everything else. I mean, what do you see? Is this a chance for, the South Side to really draw the sort of brand that maybe it hasn't seen to this point, or kind of go up a notch on this, or what do you think of that?
Yeah, most definitely. So when you look at all the presidential centers, and I'm just speaking, not on behalf of OPC, but as an advocate for it,
Right.
You don't see any of them positioned in an urban global city. None of them. And so that's another unique characteristic, right? An extremely unique characteristic that we have an opportunity to capitalize on. And so when you think about tourism, when you think about people walking around spending money on restaurants, hotels, and entertainment, that's exactly what this is helping catapult. And we're doing that with Woodlawn Central. Obviously, that's just a few blocks to the south.
Well, tell us a little bit about Woodlawn Central.
Yeah, sure. Woodlawn Central is in short going to be built on the last contiguous 8 acres of privately owned land within a 1-mile radius of the Obama Presidential Center.
And by the way, when you say we, Transwestern.
Well, Transwestern is the development manager.
Right.
We're not developing it. We're managing the development.
Got it.
And
okay.
we're serving as the owner's representative for the sponsors. And so the sponsors, and the lead developer, the sponsor being Dr. Byron Brazier, who heads the Apostolic Church of God that's located on 63rd in Dorchester. And his son, J. Byron Brazier, who's serving as the lead developer, had this vision that they wanted to ensure, this was before OPC, but they wanted to ensure that Woodlawn was created as a place that protected its community members and its culture. We're talking about people that have historical context and connectivity to everything we just talked about before regarding the Great Migration and sacrificing in order to get here and create something. And so what Woodlawn Central represents ultimately is Black success, Black ingenuity. And I think that we are going to see a project that ultimately emerges out of these 8 acres of currently, some of it's partially improved, but majority of its parking lots is over 1.3 million square feet of residential, mixed rate housing, active senior housing for individuals that still want to be mobile and want to stay home. Retail, experiential retail, leaning into that, bringing some of that creativity and innovation to the South Side. A creative arts theater, black box theater for people to be able to express their creativity. We know Chicago has many creators, but the South Side of Chicago sometimes doesn't get credited for the people that come from the South Side and have that level of ingenuity. Of 154 key hotel, to your point about servicing some of the growth in the submarket.
Let's talk about some of the challenges. And you mentioned at the top, when we first started to speak, you mentioned the hits Chicago's taken on cable and social media, everything else. And Chicago has some problems with crime. Most big cities do.
Well, listen, Jerry, we've got a great opportunity to capitalize on a mayor that understands the level of disinvestment that's taken over the course of Chicago's history. So, we are issues, to your point, that every major market faces. So that's inequality. This also touches on the criminal activity, and criminal activity, in my understanding, my research is indicative of an underlying social issue, of a lack of opportunity. And at the end of the day, it can't just come from a municipal or local government. It's got to come from the county. It's got to come from the state. It's got to come from DC. We have to understand, unfortunately, the complexities associated with these socioeconomic trends that blight our urban markets. The same thing that affects California as far as criminal activity, I would argue, is the same thing that would affect Chicago. And that has to do with drugs, access, coming into our country. And that has to do with education and jobs. And it also has to do with healthcare. The mental state of our country needs to be looked at. And that starts to play into a lot of different things.
I agree with you. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of upstream stuff that needs to be dealt with.
Right? It's a lot of upstream stuff. And this all affects commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is everything, right?
And the upstream stuff should be dealt with. But what about folks feeling like there's a flood?
A flood of what?
Well, the actual effect on daily lives right now. What needs to happen there?
At the end of the day, I think, not being a policy guy, right? I'm a real estate capital markets guy, but looking at what affects me to be able to do my job effectively is we need to create a place where people feel safe. And that in return is going to allow for people to feel comfortable investing. So if the city of Chicago cannot promote itself as a safe city, then we will be a city that cannot command investment. Mm-hmm. And I think the mayor needs to prioritize the issues that help us be understood to be a safe city. And that's not sugarcoating it, but that's figuring out, listen, how do we address the issues that have plagued some of minority communities for decades, while simultaneously addressing the issues that will help promote the city of Chicago on a global scale.
And do you see? It's I guess the answer is there's these two challenges, and they both need to be addressed at the same time. And it's that simple, and it's not easy, and it's expensive. And to your point, maybe that requires some money from DC or help from DC or the state or the county. But do you see first the will and then the ability? Are you hopeful that both things can be addressed? Let's say in the next 3-4 years, a significant difference is made.
I think if we get bullish on being honest about the issues that the city of Chicago faces, if we can all have an honest conversation, we've got the most diverse city council the city has ever had in its history. I think that is going to help us being able to address some of these issues, because now we're going to get a better understanding of the scale of the issues and how it affects someone who's from the South Side versus someone who was from the West Side who didn't have these resources to a person that had these resources. And so that's going to assist us to be able to, I think, move things forward. And then we need a mayor who understands that we need immediate, if not instant, returns, because 4 years, to your question, is not enough time to address these issues. But we can be focused on promoting Chicago better.
So let me ask you this, and from your perspective as a real estate executive, if you had a chance to bring people in a room and say, okay, let's be real about this, and nothing leaves this room, but let's really have an honest talk about this, what would be that subject in Chicago right now?
Listen, I think people need to have purpose. I think people need to wake up every day and feel like they're getting closer to achieving their dream and they need to wake up every day. If they don't feel that, then they need to wake up every day feeling like they're assisting someone else getting closer to theirs. And I think that's that period of time when we saw, you know, Chicago thriving, if you will, is economically, is people had jobs, they had homes, they had families. And you didn't need a 4-year degree in order to put food on the table. And I think that's probably, you know, the most critical thing that we have to figure out is how to give people access to their dream again.
For all the stuff that has not been perfect, certainly in Chicago's history, right? But it was the city that works, right? And there was that drive, and you know that did exist. It wasn't maybe always evenly, the opportunity wasn't always evenly distributed, and there were problems, but it was there. And I don't get that sense now. I get a sense, even just in everyday encounters, there's it seems a disappointed place at a lot of at a very basic level in a lot of daily encounters. Is that fair? Is that?
You know, I had the chance to, you know, watch Mike Reschke talk about Chicago Central Business District. And I think you guys shared a great, your last conversation with him, I thought was excellent. He's trying to do something that is, him and Quentin Primo are trying to accomplish something and do something for the city of Chicago and the Central Business District that can address some of those issues that you're talking about. People don't want to drive into the Central Business District and not have a place to eat. They don't want to live downtown if they don't feel safe. They don't want to drive their car and get a flat tire from a neglected pothole that's been sitting there for 4 months. And then to avoid the pothole, they're swerving and then getting into an accident. And now you've got entire Lakeshore Drive, DuSable Lakeshore Drive for that matter, now backed up. I think Chicago is at an inflection point where we must make a decision on what kind of city we want to be. The manufacturing part of America, I think, is extremely isolated to certain parts of our country. And Chicago, for a large part of time, was a manufacturing place, a city that worked. I think now we need to lean into these future career opportunities, these job creators. But the unfortunate part with that is that these future jobs also are job eliminators. And so we've got to figure out how the balancing act on this, right, is how do we create a place where people feel like they can be pursuing their dream, while at the same time we're not working our way out of a job, right, or working them, putting them in a position where they're working themselves out of a job. I think Chicago is a place that people still feel excitement about, that we need to make sure that they feel safe when they're here, but we need to make sure that the people that call this place home specifically need to feel safe to stay here. And so I don't get into the mix of thinking that Chicago is a place where people don't want to be. People want to be in Chicago because if you go to New York, if you go to Los Angeles, you're going to have to work twice as hard to make the types of money in order to provide for your family. Chicago is a place that I think offers global amenities. It's a place that's affordable. We've got great educational resources. We need to get our social and economic priorities in shape, and our business community needs to support that. Woodlawn Central, for example, in order to create value for an investor to come in and pour private equity or institutional capital into a project like that, you've got to have a subsidy to help mitigate the risk, because the investment community doesn't understand how to absorb that amount of risk without protecting its GP and LP partners. And so the government can step in and be that intermediary, right? That's why we're saying the state, the city, municipal government, federal government, when we see urban markets fail, We need to be cognizant of the historical context of our country. Investment needs to be made from private enterprises and public agencies for the public good, and we'll see private capital follow that. This is the last thing I'll say, on this issue is everyone, I work in commercial real estate, obviously, and everyone is saying, well, the central business district just won't be the same. What are we going to do? I tell you what we're going to do. We should now start to look at the areas of the city that we've neglected because we were focused on roughly 30 blocks. And we need to go beyond Fulton Market. And we need to go beyond Lincoln Park. And we need to go beyond Old Town. We need to go into the southern parts of the city, South Loop, near the near South Side. We need to go into further parts of the West Side, and we can find value there. We can create it just like they created it in Fulton Market, just like they created it at Goose Island. And now they're going to recreate Goose Island. Goose Island was a residential island. They turned it into an industrial submarket.
Now they're switching back. Yeah.
And now they're going to switch it back. Okay. So you see, Jerry, we can do this.